Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and I've talked about 3 of my art teachers, so I thought today might be a good day to finally do that video I've been promising and talk about who my art teachers were, give them code names, and kind of look back on what I learned from them. That way when I go forward and I reference so-and-so, I can refer you guys back to this video about who I'm talking about, because I think a lot about my art teachers and their effect on me when I'm thinking through art problems, the comics problems I'm starting to work on, going over all my art history readings, that kind of stuff. So let's see here. Once again, I'm going to have to look at the paper so I don't get lost. So hopefully I don't get too lost with you guys here on the phone. So I guess number one is, I'll call him the Hulkbuster. And the Hulkbuster was a painter who, when I was a young person, some young people learned violin, and my parents had the idea that I should practice how to paint since I loved doodling on the walls so much. So they hooked me up with the Hulkbuster when I was about 9-ish. And, I was 9, so I don't remember everything he taught me, but I learned some things like color theory, uh, acrylic and oil painting, how to, clean out your brushes, how to prepare your canvas, that kind of introductory stuff. So even though I think I did learn a lot from the Hulkbuster, I didn't learn, these were things I would kind of would be reinforced later, and I was very young, so I don't look back on the Hulkbuster too much, so I may only mention him here. The reason I call him the Hulkbuster is one of my clearest memories I have is a conversation we had when the 2004 Hulk movie came out, and people were talking about how it was going to be a CGI character for the Hulk instead of Lou Ferrigno playing the Hulk, and that was back in the day when CGI characters were still kind of a big deal. They were this weird new thing. And in our conversation, the Hulkbuster made the comment that he didn't think that digital art could ever rise to the potential of traditional art, that traditional media always would have something that the computer lacked. And, I would think about that issue in later years, and that was kind of a blunt expression of traditional tools over digital tools. I wouldn't say I entirely agree, but I did learn a lot from the Hulkbuster, so that may be the only time I reference my time learning from him. So, then I draw on my own, kind of, I guess, my family helped me, draw a bit. Some of them were artists, and they'd, show me a couple things. But in terms of art teachers, when I get to high school, my high school teachers were probably the next big influence on how I perceived art and how I learned about art. So my first art teacher in high school was Clubber Lang. That's a nice in-joke for the internet of a person you don't know that only I will get. But okay, so Clubber Lang taught me a lot about Mr. Lang taught me a lot about art. And let me see here. What do I remember? Clubber Lang was a ceramicist primarily, but he would teach kind of general art classes, so ceramics. He was kind of known throughout the school as having this sort of tough guy, Vietnam vet vibe, but he actually had a very gentle and very kind of kind, jolly teaching style. So very interesting character. And he would give you extra credit if you worked hard, just kind of a guy who appreciated hard work. And a couple things I remember about him. His organization. So one of the big things I would remember later about Clubber Lang is how he organized his art classroom, where everything was alphabetized and everything was categorized. So he wouldn't put paints right next to paper. He would put paper with drawing supplies and paints with paintbrushes, but then he would alphabetize each drawer. So P was for all painting supplies, your paintbrushes and your paints. D was for drawing supplies, all the paper and all the pencils, right? So it had the benefits of kind of being, because he was organized by categories, it had the advantage of everything you wanted was in the same place together. And then because he also alphabetized, everything was really easy to find. And what struck me about this is years after he retired, and I'd go back to that high school, I noticed they were still using his system. So this underscored for me the importance of organization to promote better use of your time and making a better artistic workspace for yourself. A disorganized art workspace inhibits your ability to make art. This became important for me later because I would start taking the advice of, I think it's called the rules for artists, that tell you to, collect everything because you might use it for an art project, and I started doing that, and what I realized was I had a ton of junk that I thought, oh, I might use it to make an art project, but I was never going to use it to make an art project, and it was just filling space, and I had to get rid of it. So later in my life, looking back at Clubber Lang, I realized the importance and the value of having an organized workspace. He would also do these really fascinating talks where he would make pots while doing the talk, and he would make about 3 or 4 beautiful, perfect cups and bowls while doing his little motivational speech, and that was always fascinating. Okay, so that was my first high school teacher. My second high school teacher, I've got a hard time coming up with a memorable nickname for her. She was kind of a grandma, so I'm just going to call her the grandma for now. Don't want to draw too many details. Okay, so all right, so the grandma. Yeah, she was a grandma by the time I was in high school. So she was my teacher for about 3 years after Clubber Lang. And the grandma, oh, let's call her Aunt May. That's perfect. That's perfect for this channel. Okay, Aunt May. So Aunt May, let's see, she had a very kind, grandmotherly approach to how she interacted with her students and how she did critique. So that informed me later that the purpose of a constructive critique isn't to, destroy the person on an atomic level. The purpose of a critique is to hopefully point them in the right direction. Now, what about like roast culture? What about telling jokes? I see that as a bit like of a different thing where you're having fun, especially if it's a professional artist who is selling their work. You can have a little fun and joke about comic books, but just her method of critiquing art really informed how I interacted with my peers later in life. She also had a debilitating a disease, which eventually affected her ability to teach. It affected how she made art. And what was inspiring about her was her endurance and her perseverance in making art in spite of something physical, which made it difficult to make art. So the kind of the life lesson for me was you have no excuse for laziness. Her art assignments were generally, sometimes she'd do kind of an interesting type of project where she'd give you a few limitations, or she'd make the assignment a little trickier to make you think, but generally it was just kind of drawing. Let's try this media. Okay, now let's try color pencil. Now let's try charcoal, and let's draw a still life. Very straightforward and very introductory, kind of Wikipedia level art history, so that I kind of knew the names of major art historical figures and read a tiny little article about them and did a little, Van Gogh inspired art project or an impressionist, pointillist inspired art project. So this helped prepare me for college, where I would have to know all these names and know a lot more about art history. So that's my high school experience. So now we come to a traditionally focused art school. And here is where we start meeting some of the people I've mentioned before on this channel. So I think my first instructors, both at the same time at the traditional art school, would be Mr. Modernist. Mr. Modernist. Let's draw a little Mr. Mime. A little Mr. Mime with a goatee. And the Renaissance Man. And for that, I think I'm just going to draw angry-looking Da Vinci, because the Renaissance Man, not only did he focus on teaching Renaissance art, but he could do that kind of style and adapt those types of techniques. I hope I didn't face reveal myself again. Anyway, so Mr. Modernist and the Renaissance Man. So Mr. Modernist, I had him for color theory, intro to design, painting classes, art history classes. And things I learned from Mr. Modernist were kind of like precision with your tools, thinking about color, thinking about line, shape, design, composition. And then in art history, these were survey classes. So in one class, you'd go from the dawn of time to the Middle Ages. In the second class, you'd go from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance up to the Pre-Impressionists. In the third class, you went from the Impressionists to the 20th century. So I got my survey of art history from Mr. Modernist. He ran a good classroom, gave us good essays, had us write papers on them, and was very focused on design. And he was an abstract painter himself, so very interested in kind of making every part of your painting work together to create a beautiful whole. The Renaissance Man also taught me some art history, which is where I learned some, Renaissance technique and how to construct your studio, how to use tools to do perspective drawing, that kind of stuff. But the Renaissance Man taught me lots about practical skills, how to haul a giant painting across the room, how to think in 3 dimensions, the difference between 3-dimensional drawing and contour line drawing. So I would say when I talk about drawing, most of my technical learning, I think I learned under the Renaissance Man. There are a few other, art history professors and such, but those were the main 2. Lone Wolf. The Lone Wolf. The Lone Wolf was an older prof. He had helped kind of build the department. There we go. There's the Lone Wolf. So he was another guy who was kind of like legendary at the school for being this cool old dude who had a long, successful career, had helped make the school's program what it was. And I had him for digital painting classes and an internship. And some things I learned from the Lone Wolf in digital paint. He did traditional painting, and I think in his old age started becoming very interested in digital painting. I learned things like the importance of having your own photography for the purposes of building a reference library for your work, thinking abstractly, thinking about color, thinking about similar things to what I learned from Mr. Modernist, the Lone Wolf would also stress. And just a fascinating guy, very, very laid back and casual in his conversation about art and kind of encouraging you to pull the best out of yourself because he was such a cool artist. You were such a cool artist. He didn't need to nag you to make you do that. You just wanted to impress him because this was a guy who kind of just emanated love for art, and you wanted some of that radiation to rub off on you, like the moon bouncing light from the sun kind of stuff. So. But maybe the most continuing lesson I learned is the importance of having my own reference library of photography, of paying attention to the world around me, of looking for, beautiful trees and beautiful light effects and scenery to inspire painting later. So who we got? We got Mr. Modernist, we got the Renaissance Man, the Lone Wolf. Those were probably my major influences in that school and that time of life. I mean, I had a printmaking professor where I learned some printmaking techniques, but I learned printmaking. I'd say the main things I'm thinking about compositionally that are relevant to comics, I'd say most of those lessons came from these 3. So these are the 3 I would refer back to the most when talking about that educational experience. Okay. Oh, wait a second. How could I forget? The One. I have mentioned the One before. We're just going to put a giant question mark for the One because the One is the one who, I commanded respect in the classroom. The One is the one I'm scared of if I ever get doxxed, that she would find out I talked about her class. So the One was a very impressive kind of Professor McGonagall type personality. And from her, I learned the importance of things like professionalism, of taking myself seriously, of speaking correctly, of being polite, of not checking my privilege, but maybe humility, of not thinking I'm all that and that I have nothing to learn, but quickly learning, hey, I've got a lot to learn from these professors, so I better put the pride aside and just absorb as much as I can. She taught me about watercolor and collage, so technical things, history things, thinking about, big issues of quality in art, valuing your time and valuing what your work means, even in little dinky projects, to still value yourself enough that you present the best possible work you can for whoever it's for. And I think that's one reason why I've talked so much about how even a goofy little comic that's supposed to be funny, that's still a representation of your love of your practice. Even if you think that Marvel, you can just get away with lazy work from Marvel, that's going to have an effect for the rest of your future because your name's going to be attached to that ugly comic that you cranked out and were lazy about. So valuing my own work is a big lesson of the One, and I learned a lot about European art from her too. Okay, that would cover my experience learning from about art in a school that focused on traditional art. So now I want to talk about my time in an environment which I would call a progressive social justice environment. Progressive SJW time. Okay, so in this time, let me think. I mean, I had okay teachers who I thought, valued my time and were dedicated to their craft, and they were teaching me kind of basically feminist art, 20th century, postmodern art. And I actually did learn some things in this environment. I did learn some, techniques about, film and video, that kind of stuff. So I have no excuse for not putting together a good film, because I did the projects where I learned how to edit things together right. So now you can hold me accountable. But I guess this is the time of my life where I was just wondering, why am I learning about this? Okay, sure, maybe in theory I'm learning about art history and that could help me be an art teacher, but what am I learning that is connected with the kind of art that I really love, that I care about, right? But I had, during this time I had one professor, and here I've got to be really careful because even the nickname could dox me a bit. So we're just going to call this one the Badass. And the Badass was a professional cartoonist. How will I draw the Badass? I'm going to draw the Badass as a giant brush, because the Badass loved art so much that that's just a good representation of who the Badass is. Okay, so the Badass helped me have hope in this environment, that I wasn't wasting my time and that I was learning things. The Badass taught me good technical stuff about cartooning and about combining good journaling habits with good sketchbook habits. So you shouldn't just keep a sketchbook. You should also keep a journal or a diary. Because writing, even if you don't write your own stories, these are both products of creative thinking, and you need to nurture both aspects. You need to make observations about the world in written form and make observations about the world in quick sketch form. This person also taught me, kind of again of the value of kindness in critique, where the point isn't to wreck someone or destroy them or humiliate them, but to kind of point them in the direction. This person didn't even like the idea of critiques whatsoever. Kind of in the tradition of, modernist painting, everyone would set up and we do a critique on, for the Renaissance class, well, what are the proportions correct? Is the perspective correct? For the modernist painting class, is this composition pleasing? Or do the colors harmonize? So even though there was a de-emphasis on critique in this environment, there was an emphasis on excellence and on motivating yourself through good artistic habits. This is what I'd say when I talk about pathos in comics. This is one of the things I'm getting at. Do you have the soul that loves art enough that you can motivate yourself to make tons and tons of art? Do you draw every single day? Do you make it easy for you to draw at any time, or are you just waiting for inspiration to come along and strike you? Can you find inspiration in everyday circumstances and draw from those circumstances to give experience and life and vibrancy to the imaginative or fiction work you do? So yes, this did emphasize, technical excellence, doing the best work you could, putting time into your work, but actually even above technique, I would say this emphasized creative thinking over technique. And the Badass's way, the Badass's kind of exuberant love of art and love of comics and love of cartooning was infectious, and people would start imitating that, I think, and the Badass had an ability to bring the best out of you. So this was quite an educational experience for me. It helped kind of give context to sort of the SJW weird progressive aspect of my time in that school, and gave me a lot of joy and a lot of hope and a feeling that, yes, I'm a cartoonist, I love cartooning, I want to make comics. I don't need to just grow out of comics and pretend that those are a thing from my childhood. These are a thing of value to me that I'm interested in studying and looking at. So those are my art teachers, and then kind of took that experience, I drew every day. I wasn't buying superhero comics, and I graduate and I discover our boy Zach. Let's give him some Sunny D. And Zach has kind of helped me give language for talking about comics and a desire to get back into the comics industries. Okay, so he's got some Sunny D. Now we need some Go-Gurt. Let's write it. G, Go-Gurt. Oh boy. I sure hope Senpai doesn't notice me doing this. This is not a okay drawing. Oh boy. All right, so yeah, boy. I don't know about you. He may have decided that Z-A-C-K is the spelling, but I am a rebel. I am headcanoning Z-A-C-H as my preferred spelling. Anyway, so your boy Zach helped give me the courage to, just grab a phone and start talking about comics. Got me to buy tons of comics, because when I'm into something, I get passionate about it, and I don't want to just read one or two Marvel comics. I want to see how the industry is doing, how these characters are doing. So even though I had all this great artistic experience and thinking leading up to this, I think Zach was the spark which got me interested in looking at the industry again, and not just making my own comics in my spare time, but really taking seriously the state of the industry. And his idea that Marvel is the health of the industry really struck a chord with me, because even though I've had an interest in graphic novels and Will Eisner and kind of indie comics that are a bit off the beaten path, I've always loved the Marvel characters and the DC characters, and I've kind of always recognized them as the gateway drug to the bigger world of comics. And Marvel needs to be a healthy enough industry to appeal to enough people that new people are being brought into this medium that we love. Otherwise, if you don't have that broad appeal, there's going to be no market for the edgy, the edgy kind of artsy experimental comics. A lot of those I love, and I may talk about in this channel, because I do dig that kind of stuff. But Zach has given me a lot to think about, and a lot of theses to consider for my own channel. So just to review, it's going backwards in time. Our boy Zach, the badass, the one, the lone wolf, the Renaissance Man, Mr. Modernist, Aunt May, Clubber Lang, and the Hulkbuster. Yep, and I'll probably focus on maybe kind of like probably college. College is going to be the most important time for me to talk about, because that's where I learned the most about these periods of art history that I'm interested in, and these themes of the philosophy of art that I'm trying to connect to our contemporary discussion on comics. I think that's all. I'm number one Marmaduke fan. Summa Triggerum, Summa Spoilerum, Summa Tangentum. I love you guys. Why don't you like, comment, and subscribe? And Project Chrono Triggered is coming, and it is going to be the culmination of my whole time as an artist. Love you guys. Thanks for watching.